Let's talk about what's happening in Brazil. Polling's underway. The country is voting for its next president. Who's running? Incumbent President Jair Bolsonaro. He's 67 years old. He's been in office for 4 years. And now he is hoping for a re-election. Giving Bolsonaro a tough competition is this man. His name is Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva. He's 76 years old. Former US President Barack Obama once called Lula the most popular politician on earth. Lula wants to be Brazil's next president. Chances are he may be. So let's now try and understand who he is and what his story is. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. My name is Priyanka Sharma and this is the map of Brazil. Lula was born in this state called Pernambuco in 1945. His parents were peasants. Lula's childhood was spent selling peanuts and shining other people's shoes. He was introduced to reading at the age of 10, but he could not continue his education because he had to work to feed his family. Lula began training as a metal worker. At 14, he got his first job at a warehouse. When he was 19, Lula met with an accident and lost the little finger on his left hand. Lula went on to marry a woman named Maria de Lourdes, but she died of hepatitis in 1969. Following her death, Lula joined trade union politics. In the 1970s, workers in Brazil were striking. They wanted higher wages, and Lula became one of the popular faces of these strikes. In 1974, he married a student inspector named Marissa Leticia. The following year, Lula was elected the leader of the Metal Workers Union. He was leading some 100,000 men. In 1980, Lula established the Workers' Party, or PT. Through this party, Lula began reaching out to the poor in particular and promising ethical governance. In the 1980s, Brazil was in the middle of a military dictatorship. There was repression, forced disappearances, murders. The 21-year-old military dictatorship came to an end in 1988. Lula began campaigning for change. He was promising eradication of hunger. He was pledging to create an outward-looking nation. Lula was elected president in 2002. He entered office in 2003 and went on to serve 2 terms. So did he deliver on his promises? Well, it depends on who you ask. Lula's supporters say he improved the country's higher education. He also lifted millions out of poverty, spearheaded social programs, oversaw economic boom, and elevated Brazil on the world stage. It was under Lula that Brazil hosted the FIFA World Cup and the Summer Olympics. But Lula's critics accuse him of allowing a vast kickback scheme. They say Lula failed to address the root cause of poverty and stands as a symbol of corruption. He left office in 2010. Rather, he was forced to. You see, Brazil's constitution does not allow a leader to serve 3 consecutive terms. When Lula left office, his approval rating was more than 80%. To say he's popular would be an understatement. But then again, does popularity necessarily mean support or trust? The last few years have not been the best for Lula, both personally and politically. Right after leaving office, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. The treatment went on for almost a year, during which Lula had to shave off his trademark beard. In 2012, he was declared cancer-free, but soon Lula found himself in the middle of political and legal trouble. In 2017, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison for accepting a beachside apartment as a bribe. Then in 2017, Lula also lost his second wife to a brain hemorrhage. The following year, he was convicted in a bribery scandal called Operation Car Wash. The case was brought by the US Department along with Brazil and Switzerland. At the center of the scandal was a construction company called Odebrecht. It bribed leaders to the tune of $778 million. Why? To secure lucrative contracts in Brazil and other countries. Lula was the senior-most political leader to be convicted in this scandal. He was sentenced to 12 years in jail and was banned from the presidential race in 2018. Lula had already begun campaigning against Bolsonaro, who back then was running for his first term in office. After the court's judgment, Lula's campaign had to shut shop. To many, it looked like the end of Lula's political career. In 2021, an apex court judge annulled Lula's corruption conviction. But this did not stop Lula's critics from branding him unfit for office. Bolsonaro, for example, said that Lula coming back to power would be like a criminal coming back to a crime scene. Lula, on his part, has begun comparing himself to Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, even Martin Luther King Jr. He wants to be seen as a political prisoner who came out of the jail to change the world. Whether Lula is a criminal returning to the crime scene or a political prisoner who can transform Brazil is something the voters of Brazil will decide. Some 156 million Brazilians will be voting in this election. There's also a record number of first-time voters. Also, I don't know how many of you know this, but in Brazil it is mandatory to cast your vote. Meaning, if you are in the age group of 18 to 70, then voting is not optional for you. The question is, how many of these people will actually vote for Lula? He was the first common man in Brazil's history to become president. Before him, leaders either came from the military or from privileged families. So he has that instant connect with the working class, and that is likely to work in his favor. And so is anti-incumbency. Brazilians are not exactly happy with Bolsonaro. Last we checked, his approval rating was down to 31%. The country is battling rising prices, the never-ending pandemic. Bolsonaro is accused of downplaying the pandemic, peddling fake news, embracing unproven drugs, encouraging anti-vax sentiments. It does not help that his environmental policies have been criticized not just in Brazil, but also outside it. Under Bolsonaro, deforestation in the Amazon reached a 15-year high. Forest fires also skyrocketed. Lula's campaign is focused heavily on the Amazon. He told reporters, and I quote, "We need to look after our forest, our fauna, our water. But most of all, we need to look after our people because they are struggling. They're in need and they need to live with dignity." This was Lula's 6th presidential campaign, and this time too he projected himself as the candidate of the poor. His campaign was built around the theme of rich versus poor and we versus they. That's his pitch. Lula is proposing high taxes on the rich. He plans to use that money to fund more benefits for the poor. Lula also built around his old promises, making life better for the poor, widening the safety net, increasing minimum wage, lowering inflation, food for more, houses for more, jobs for more. The timing helps his campaign. Inflation is in double digits. Some 33 million people are battling hunger. This time too, Lula is promising change. Some of his promises have not gone down too well with the church. In March, Lula said that as a father, he is against abortion. But if he wins, he will treat it as a public health issue. Currently, Brazil only permits abortion to save a pregnant woman's life or if the pregnancy is a result of rape or incest. What about Lula's foreign policies? What is he promising? In the months leading up to the polls, he accused Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky of wanting the war that has destroyed his country. A recent life event added a fresh lease of life to Lula's campaign. In May this year, Lula married a sociologist named Rosângela da Silva. Speaking about her, Lula said, and I quote, "I am in love as if I were 20 years old, as if she were my first girlfriend." So if Lula wins this election, it would add to a wider change in the region. If you zoom out and look at Latin America, there has been a recent turn to leftist populism. Left leaders have ridden the anti-incumbency wave one after the other, be it in Mexico, Argentina, Peru, Chile, or Colombia. But a victory for Lula won't be so easy. For starters, the winning candidate would have to garner 50% of votes plus one. Otherwise, there will be a round 2 of polling. And that will be on the 30th of October.